Welcome to this episode of the Listen Hub podcast.
So there was a pretty interesting announcement recently from Autumn J. Rountree, the host of those faith-based podcasts. She said she's back after a break, but the big news is a new category she's adding to her a cyber friend platform. And the category is politics and government. She explicitly said she wants to blend the two subjects together. That sounds like a potentially explosive combination.
It really does. On the surface, it sounds like inviting your most argumentative relatives over for Thanksgiving dinner and telling them to have at it. But what's fascinating is the context she's launching this into. It's not happening in a vacuum. She's tapping into two digital markets that are absolutely booming right now.
Okay, so this isn't just a random whim. What are we talking about here?
Well, first, there's the whole virtual companionship space. These rent-a-cyber-friend platforms are designed to combat loneliness, offering someone to talk to. And that market is projected to skyrocket. We're talking about growing from around $3.1 billion in 2025 to over $10.5 billion by 2035. That's more than tripling in a decade.
Wow. Okay. So there's a huge demand for just connection.
A huge demand. And at the same time, you have the incredible rise of faith-based media. Her podcasts, God and Let's Focus on God, are part of this trend. We saw Christian podcasts earlier this year actually surpassing some mainstream ones in popularity. So you have these two massive engaged audiences, people seeking connection and people seeking spiritual content. Rountree is standing right at the intersection of these two speeding trains.
You've highlighted the incredible growth in both of those areas. But what makes her decision to times blend times them so significant, rather than just offering them as separate categories? What's the deeper ambition here?
I think the blending is the entire point. It suggests she wants to move beyond just superficial chats. This is about creating a space to explore how a person's faith genuinely times their political views, and maybe how their politics challenge their faith. For a lot of people, these aren't separate boxes in their life. They're deeply intertwined. And the idea is that the one-on-one cyber friend model could be a safer space for that kind of integration, away from the yelling matches you see on Twitter or Facebook.
That makes sense. A more personalized space. But given how sensitive this is, what does this tell us about the evolving idea of digital religion itself? Is it moving beyond just being a place for a virtual prayer group and becoming something more politically active?
I think it has to be. There's a whole academic field now called digital religion, and it's looking at exactly this. It's not just about how people practice faith online, but how those online communities start to engage with politics and human rights. Rountree's platform feels like a real-world example of that evolution. It's a shift from just seeking spiritual solace online to actively trying to figure out how your faith connects to your role as a citizen.
So her initiative isn't just a new feature. It's a strategic move that's riding these big digital trends while also pushing the boundaries of what online religion and companionship can even be. But this bold blend inevitably brings us to a huge challenge. How do you even begin to navigate the tension of discussing faith and politics constructively?
Exactly. We've established that her venture is riding these significant digital waves. But let's be honest, for most people, blending faith and politics sounds like a recipe for conflict. It's a historical minefield.
Right? It's the two things you're told never to bring up at a dinner party, and she's building the whole dinner party around them. Why are these two topics so inherently difficult to discuss together?
Well, the core issue is that both faith and politics touch upon our most deeply held personal values, our moral frameworks, our entire worldview. When someone challenges your political stance or your religious beliefs, it doesn't feel like they're just disagreeing with an opinion. It can feel like a personal attack on who you are. The conversation moves from a debate about ideas to a conflict between identities.
That's a really good point. So, given that inherent difficulty, some would argue that just avoiding these discussions is the best way to keep the peace. But Rountree is doing the exact opposite. What's the counter argument here? Why is it so necessary to engage with this?
The counter argument is that avoidance doesn't solve anything. It just pushes these powerful forces into their own separate corners, into echo chambers where beliefs get more and more extreme without ever being challenged. Rountree's idea seems to be based on the belief that to live a coherent, integrated life, people times need times to figure out how their spiritual side connects with their civic side. The goal is to build understanding not just for others, but for yourself.
Okay, I see that. Can you give me an analogy to help me wrap my head around why blending these two explosive topics might actually be a necessary process instead of just a dangerous one?
Sure. Think of it like learning to handle a very complex, high performance vehicle. You wouldn't just leave it in the garage because it's powerful and potentially dangerous. You'd want to learn how it works, understand its mechanics, and practice driving it in a safe, controlled environment. Faith and politics are incredibly powerful forces that shape our world. Roundtree's platform in this analogy is trying to be a kind of driving school, offering a controlled, one on one space to learn how to drive these conversations respectfully instead of just crashing on the open road of public social media.
A driving school for difficult conversations. I like that. So the ambition isn't just to talk about faith and politics, but to times learn how times to talk about them. This brings us to the unique part of her approach, the cyber friend model. Can a personalized, supportive interaction truly fix the problems we've just discussed, or does it introduce a whole new set of risks?
And that is the central question. Roundtree's unique solution is that cyber friend model. The whole idea is that the one-on-one personalized dynamic can mitigate that confrontational energy we see everywhere else.
Okay, but how exactly does that work? How does a cyber friend who is paid to be supportive actually transform a conversation about, say, a deeply divisive political issue?
The key is the shift in intent. On a public forum, the goal is usually to win an argument, to score points. With a cyber friend, the stated goal is different. It's companionship, active listening, and support for personal exploration. This allows someone to think out loud about how their faith connects to their political views without feeling like they're in a debate. The goal becomes self-reflection, not converting an opponent.
That sounds ideal in theory, but that very word, supportive, also raises a massive red flag for me. The risk of creating a perfect echo chamber. If the cyber friend is primarily there to listen and support, what stops users from just paying for someone to affirm their existing biases?
That's the paradox, isn't it? And it's the biggest risk. The success of this entire thing will depend almost entirely on the training and the guidelines given to these cyber friends. They can't just be passive listeners nodding along. They'd have to be trained as skilled facilitators.
So the cyber friend isn't just a friend, but more like a conversational guide.
Exactly. A guide who can ask probing questions, gently introduce different ways of looking at an issue without being confrontational. The platform has to define support, not as blind agreement, but as the act of facilitating a deeper, more thoughtful exploration for the user. Without that, it's just a very comfortable, but ultimately useless echo chamber.
So from a user's perspective, I shouldn't go in expecting a simple pat on the back.
Right. The user has to come with a genuine desire for self-understanding, not just validation. You should expect a space where you can work through your own thoughts and receive thoughtful engagement, not judgment or automatic agreement. It's about building a coherent worldview, not just reinforcing the one you walked in with.
It's a fascinating tightrope walk then, balancing that personalized support with the absolute need for real intellectual engagement. And the implications of getting that balance right or wrong go way beyond just Roundtree's platform.
They really do. This isn't just an isolated experiment. It taps into much larger trends. We're living in an era where our digital lives and our real lives are completely blurred, and people are desperately trying to make sense of it all.
And there's definitely a hunger for coherence. People want to understand how their spiritual beliefs should connect to their vote, or how their political activism lines up with their moral values, especially in such a polarized world. Roundtree's platform is basically offering a personal, private space to do that messy work.
Exactly. And if it's successful, think about how it could change the future of online companionship. It could set a new precedent.
You mean we could see this model expand, like specialized cyber friends for other complex topics?
Absolutely. Imagine cyber friends trained to facilitate discussions on ethical dilemmas in your career, or philosophical questions about meaning, or even navigating profound grief. It would transform the service from just being about general emotional support into a platform for structured personal growth. The cyber friend becomes less of a friend and more of a digital guide for navigating your deepest convictions.
That's an exciting vision, but it brings us back to those big, unresolved questions. We've talked about civil dialogue and echo chambers. What do you see as the single most critical factor that will determine whether this bold experiment actually succeeds?
For me, the most critical factor is the quality of the training and the guidelines for the cyber friends. That's number one. But tied to that is whether the platform can actively cultivate a culture of intellectual curiosity, not just a culture of affirmation. It's not enough to just provide the room. You have to design the experience so that questioning your own assumptions is the whole point of being there. If they can't do that, the risk of it just becoming another comfortable bubble is incredibly high.
So, in the end, this venture is a bold leap into a really complex digital frontier. It feels like a crucial test case for whether we can use technology to have more meaningful, constructive dialogues about the things that divide us most.
That's right. So if we were to boil this all down, it seems like Rowntree's venture is, on one hand, a really savvy business move. It's leveraging these two massive, growing digital trends: the need for connection and the search for spiritual community.
Right, but it's a business move that's also trying to solve a huge societal problem: how to talk about faith and politics without tearing each other apart. And it's proposing this very specific, personalized cyber friend model as a potential solution.
And the entire project lives or dies on whether it can thread that needle, whether it can truly be a space for genuine intellectual growth and self-reflection, rather than just becoming another expensive, customized echo chamber. The success will depend entirely on its design and the skill of its facilitators.
Autumn J. Rountree's decision to explicitly blend discussions of faith and governance within a personalized digital companionship environment isn't just a new online feature. It's a profound experiment at the intersection of our deepest beliefs and our public lives. It forces us to ask, can technology designed for connection truly bridge our most fundamental divides? Or does the comfort of personalized interaction risk isolating us further into curated echo chambers? The trajectory of this venture will offer invaluable insights, not only into the future of online community and digital companionship, but more broadly into humanity's ongoing quest to reconcile faith, politics, and the ever-evolving landscape of civil discourse. You know, it's always interesting when a podcast host announces a new direction. I saw that Autumn J. Rountree from the Let's Focus on God podcast just dropped some news. She's planning a special episode on the Shanann and Christopher Watts murder case.
Oh, wow, that's a heavy topic.
It is. And her plan is to approach this really disturbing event specifically through the lens of faith, with a focus on understanding God's will.
That is a very bold move. I mean, to tackle such a sensitive and widely publicized tragedy, not from a true crime angle, but from a theological one, you're aiming to find spiritual meaning in something just completely horrific.
Right. And that's the so what of it, isn't it? What's striking is that she's framing the Watts case not just as a crime, but as an opportunity for spiritual reflection. This isn't about explaining the how of the murders, but exploring a why from a divine perspective. For her audience, that's a very unique angle.
Exactly. It really highlights this growing desire people have for frameworks to process extreme, chaotic events. For Rowntree's listeners, that framework is faith. It's about trying to find some kind of resilience or purpose when you're confronted with the darkest aspects of human behavior.
So she's using her platform to foster understanding and spiritual reflection on these incredibly challenging topics. But beyond this special episode, she also announced she's expanding her Rent a Cyber Friend platform. What's the significance of that expansion?
Well, she's adding a new category to it. We don't know the specifics yet, but the move itself points to a growing demand for these kinds of online companionship and support services.
That makes sense.
It shows a clear trend. People are increasingly seeking digital connections and forms of support outside of traditional avenues. She's clearly tapping into that market.
So on one hand, you have this podcast exploring profound spiritual questions about tragedy, and on the other, an expansion of digital companionship services. It feels like a clear strategy from her to engage her audience on multiple levels.
I think so. When you pull it all together, the key takeaway is that she's committed to using her platform for these deeper conversations. She's launching this special episode on the Watts case to offer a spiritual perspective on tragedy. At the same time, she's expanding her Rent, a cyber friend service. Both of these initiatives really highlight a growing interest in both faith-based discussions about complex events and new forms of online companionship.
That's all for this episode of the Listen Hum podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.